When we last heard about Ruby, she'd just discovered she'd been tricked.
The job she was promised turned out to be an online sex trafficking den in the Philippines.
How did she manage to escape?
And what happened to her after?
We're doing a full recap of Finding Ruby on this episode of So Much Crime,
So Little Time.
You know when you're waiting at a bar for your fancy cocktail to be made and you're like, what am I going to do with all of this time? Well, yesterday that happened to me, but instead of just waiting, instead of scrolling, I went to patreon.com/so much crime, so little time. And you know what I got there? Early release episodes, bonus content, fantastic outtakes, and also I got the warm and fuzzy feeling, not from the tequila, but from supporting this show. Patreon.com/so much crime, so little time. Thanks. Welcome to So Much Crime, So Little Time. I'm Dee.
And I'm Jeff. And before we start, just a quick warning.
Warning!
This episode will have spoilers for Finding Ruby. We're going to discuss the whole series.
If you haven't listened yet, check out our preview episode on this show. It's the one before this one in your feed.
And we'll also put a link to Finding Ruby in our show notes. Okay, Dee, before we get into this, let's talk about what Finding Ruby is.
Okay, so a little bit about the podcast and the crime itself. This was released in 2022. The host is Rich Thompson, the creative director of Cadence Media. There are 6 episodes ranging between 40 and 50 minutes per episode. And just so you all know, it just won loads of awards, including Best New Podcast 2023 by the Australian Podcast Awards, along with lots of others. People loved it. Jeff, tell us a little bit about this story.
Yeah, so last time in our preview, we talked about the first episode. In that episode, we met Ruby. She was the youngest of 10 kids. She was living on a farm in the remote mountains of the Philippines. Her parents both died when she was still pretty young. And for about 2 years, she was living alone. All of her older siblings had moved out. And so she's about 16. She gets this mysterious job offer. She follows it, and she goes basically across the Philippines. Once she gets there, she realizes that she's been tricked into this world known as OSEC, which is the online sexual exploitation of children. In that episode, we also just learned a little bit about OSEC, how at the time, and this was in 2013, it was still a new and growing thing, how it was really hard to stop. A little bit more about the victims. Many of them were children, about half were under 12 years old. And it was, we heard how hard it was to catch the customers or the criminals in this. And that was kind of it for episode 1. So we listened to 5 more episodes. Dee, where do you want to start?
Oh no, Jeff. The first episode 1, 2, and 3, the first half of this series is like all of the worst things imaginable in your ears. It was real hard to listen to, and I understand one of the points of episode 1 was we need to get out of our discomfort and shine a light in all of this, and I get that, and I think it's really important to have listened to this and also to speak out about it. But you can't take away from just how gross it was. Even in episode 2, there was this opening of the episode where Ruby is talking about one of her birthdays, where her dad builds a boat and brings her and her brother out on some lake or something, and or the sea, whatever it was, and they're in the boat and they're having this amazing time, and then this stark contrast of Ruby being in what they call the duty room, which is the room where she has to perform for these criminals behind computer screens. It was really powerful. I felt a lot of this was so powerful without being salacious, without being disrespectful, I think, to the victims. But my God, was it hard to listen to.
Yeah, I think that's worth noting. We talked about how it wasn't salacious in the preview episode. I think I appreciated that as it went on, as it got into kind of the worst of the worst, it was still tactful. I kept worrying, like it kept coming up to the line of being about to describe something that you can't really unhear. And we heard about some of the like the investigators, the social workers who would see things when they were doing raids or even just pictures associated with these crimes and how much that haunted them. And I appreciated that we heard about that without hearing the actual details of it. Like I think that
we did hear one snippet that is burned in my mind. I think it was in episode 3.
What was that?
I don't want to re-say it, but there was a section where one of the children, it was a real short snippet where one of the children mentioned what they had been asked to do.
Might have already blocked that out of my head.
It's better that you have. I could have done without that, but probably more so than anything we've ever listened to, the format and the presentation of telling this type of story has to be done right. And I feel like they really did. For, I would say 99% of it, told a story in a way that remained respectful of the victims. So kudos for that. Can't have been easy.
No, I imagine this was and we heard it also. I think I appreciated the sort of candor of the host talking about how he wanted to give up on this sometimes because it was just so hard to deal with the content. One thing that related to that I thought was interesting was kind of how they treated Ruby. Because I think Ruby is ostensibly, she's the victim and she's the hero of this story. And I think it was a difficult thing to make her into a real person, to not just make her into this sort of mythologized figure, this person who, that things happened to her, but that she had some agency. And I think, she clearly is a person with agency, right? Like she came out of this, she changed. She was responsible. Seemingly, she was at the center of getting the people who ran this house sent to prison. She's become, a powerful speaker. I feel like we got a good sense of her as a fully rounded human.
Yeah.
Which really could have gone a different way. Like she could have just been this sort of amorphous figure at the center of this. That was something I was actually worried about at the beginning, was like, are we going to kind of get all sides of her? And I think we did.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
The other thing that I appreciated was in episode 3. So each episode I think was very well sort of segmented, but in episode 3 we heard about the type of person who's on the other end of these online, so a person who was one of the customers. And this was Mark, who is a guy in the UK. He's a grandfather. And as messed up as this whole thing is, I thought it was really interesting to kind of portray that side of it with some also, I thought, humanity, and recognize that these are people who maybe have like a porn addiction, or, find themselves sort of in this on some sort of like slippery slope. There are certainly, I'm sure, people out there who go looking for this, but there's also people who sort of fall into this, then can't get their way out. Like I feel like I hope he wasn't the exception to the rule, as someone who sort of like turned themselves in initially and was sort of wanted to repent. But I don't know. What did you think of that?
I had so many feelings because I felt some sort of empathy and feeling towards him. Then we turned himself in, like how hard that is, and how much that changed, I'm sure, his relationship with his wife and his kids and his grandkids. Yeah. I can't imagine any of his grandkids being allowed to be around him unaccompanied after that, like just even from a logical point of view and more practical standpoint. And I felt that was a powerful moment, but for the fecker to go back after giving himself in, that hit differently, I think, because he had already put his like whatever about him, honestly, whatever, but he had put his family through so much at that point. Like they were already probably stigmatized by what he had done, and because he was on the sex register and a sex offenders list and stuff already. But then to actually go back and engage with it because you just think you can get away with it.
Yeah.
That's the part that really, I think, bugged me about Mark's story, is that he'd already, like, if he's only going to consider himself and his own family, because clearly he doesn't give a shit about the children at the other end of the line here. So if he's only going to give a shit about himself and his family, he's already put them through the worst, and he's going to continue to do that. It's like a different level. I don't know.
Yeah.
I really liked each episode seems to have a similar format in terms of this scene setting.
Yeah.
To set up whether it's, you know, Mark as the older man living in England or Ruby and her birthday party or whatever. There's always this section of scene setting, and then it might go back in time a little bit or go forward in time a little bit, but it's all kind of connected. I feel like it did a few things. It kind of did a really good job of breaking things up from the like darkness of this whole story, you know, hearing about Ruby and her family and her birthday party and how she felt before and this freedom, and like, I don't know, it gave it another level of emotion, and it gave everyone another side. It wasn't just, say for Mark in episode 3, it wasn't just he's a sick creep who needs to be put behind bars. It was he's a person. He's a person who's living in a community, seems successful, seems to have it all, kind of thing. I don't know, it gave another level. I think that's important as to when you're listening to so much content about this. But I also just feel like I don't know. Part of my ears stopped wanting to hear some of the things that we were hearing. And these intros nearly allowed me to get used to the story and kind of, I don't know, warm up to like, okay, we're getting into something. I don't know. And it really brought to life everything in the story, in the podcast and in the episode that was being said. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think, I mean, even in episode 2, which I think was to me the hardest episode to listen to, like it went to some of the darkest places, which we had, I think, anticipated, like we knew where it was going. I think it was in episode 2 where we heard about how Ruby's story was sort of the exception to the rule, that often this is happening within families. And then we heard from a person who was in jail for this crime as a parent. And
that pissed me off so much.
That was infuriating.
Pissed me off so much. The poverty card, pimp yourself out. Pimp yourself out if that's what needs to happen.
Yeah. I thought it did a nice job of, I thought the podcast did an effective job.
Harsh?
No. Well, maybe.
Like if you're going down that route, don't let it be the kids. Sorry.
No.
It really pissed me off.
What I appreciated that the podcast called bullshit on saying this is a crime of poverty. And it went to, I thought a fairly extensive length to point out why this isn't a crime of poverty. If it was, there's a lot of people in poverty who aren't doing this. And there's also like people who do this and they become rich and they just keep doing it. It's not, they're not trying to put food on the table. And I appreciated that.
They lack moral fiber.
I want to talk about a different part of this. I want to jump ahead a couple episodes and talk about episode 4. One of the things we heard about in episode 4 was about kind of how we're trying to prevent this. And we talked about the tech companies and how there are companies that know this is happening on their platforms. There are things they could certainly do to stop it, and they don't. How do you feel about that?
How do I feel about extremely profitable companies turning a blind eye to the online sexual exploitation of children? Is that the question? I mean, fuck them. Like, seriously. It's a much once more. I think I said this before on one of our podcasts. My dad has this phrase that his mum used to always say, which is much once more. And the tech companies, the same with Nadine and Pedro in the story, who are running this operation where Ruby is pulled into, they're really wealthy.
Yeah.
But they want more.
Yep.
And they don't give a shit who they're exploiting. And for any tech company who has the ability to help end this for any number of children and they're refusing to do so, you might as well be the Mark at the other end of the line, I think, because you're enabling. One of the many, I would say, elements of this podcast that I really enjoyed was that you've 3 episodes that is about, you know, the worst of humanity.
Right.
Followed by 3 episodes where you feel, I definitely felt like we were hearing about the best of humanity. You
Yeah.
know, the best type of people who are skilled and working to do good and to stop, not even just to do good themselves, but to stop the depravity that is happening. And, you know, from I don't remember anyone's name, obviously. The lawyer was a Kath,
Kath.
who's like so new in her career. Like, what was it, day 3 when she was on this raid, and then she met Ruby. Then we're hearing about the guy from IJM who is the lawyer, the main attorney for them. Like, he was so cool. And then you've even got the woman who's running what they're calling Lighthouse in this, which
Rosa.
is like the
Rosa,
the kind of the place that the girls go to heal.
Yeah.
And get ready to go out into the world again.
Yeah.
And then you hear about Ruby herself and how she's thriving, not just physically, but mentally as well. Yeah. And she hasn't just escaped this whole absolute nightmare, but she's healing and she's thriving. And it's just this entire swing. I feel like often when we're dealing with podcasts, we're just hearing about the worst and the end is, well, nobody knows. But in this, you've got this gorgeous balance of her thriving. And I know they say it, and I know it's important to say, Ruby got out of this and Ruby has done well. And that is not the case for everyone. For, you know, every one person or one child who's saved, there are many others who are still in this. But this format of the podcast was a way of telling the story and it touching, I think, our hearts without it being, I don't know, it just felt so balanced. And then, you know, the guy, he works for IJM and he was basically saying, I love my job.
Yeah.
Like, I love my job. More people like this in the world, please. But I think of how hard I sometimes find work.
Sure.
And then I'm like, oh, wow, this isn't, you know, as hard as or intense as it was when I was teaching. Like, it's a freaking breeze in comparison to that. And then I think of a job like theirs in IJM and anyone involved in this kind of work. And I am like,
No, it really puts it in perspective.
Hugely.
To your point, it's kind of like 3 and 3. Like, yes, there's bits woven throughout all the episodes, but the first 3 episodes really are the hardest, the darkest, and then the last 3 episodes are really about Ruby and these other very good people doing very good things. And it's pretty inspiring. I feel like this we talked about this before, this was an advocacy podcast. Like, it is trying to make the world better. It's trying to draw attention to this crime. It's trying to shine a light on this. And to do that, it has to be listenable.
Yep.
You have to get through it. Because if you, like, and I think it did that from the jump. Like, I think it did that from episode 1. I imagine, I'd be curious to see how many people listened to episode 1, didn't make it through episode 1, or listened to episode 1, didn't make it through it all. You know, like, I'd be really curious to see what sort of persistence there was through all the episodes of this.
Yeah, that would be interesting to figure out. One question I had for you was, I mean, how do you feel, kind of is probably the wrong way to tee up this question. But I want to talk to you about Ruby finding peace and forgiving Nadine and Pedro. Am I just like too old and cynical for this? But like, even them apologizing, like, the fucking cheek of them. I
thought this was tactfully but clearly contextualized as part of Ruby finding Jesus and her Christian faith. Something that wasn't a part of her life when she was younger, and then through her sort of healing process, this was something that came up. I feel like that's why they drew attention to that. And I feel like the host said at one point, like, I have to tell you this part. Like, why include this part? Because it makes this next part make sense. That's what I took away from it, was this was very much like from a religious standpoint.
I don't think I have the space to forgive them, and I wasn't even involved in it.
Yeah, that moment where she stops as they're leaving the courtroom and she wants to say that she forgives them, it was fairly astounding. And I think it speaks to Ruby's character, and I think her strength as a person. I mean, the fact that she even went to court and showed up, that she was willing
And
to
that really strong lawyer
the
who
defense
was trying
attorney,
to who was trying to bash her down and take her down, and she was just like not phased, and then he ended up like leaving, which I didn't know you could just do.
Sure.
I'm actually out. I don't want to lose. It's like me in tennis. I actually have to go now. It doesn't count if we didn't finish all 6.
And you forgot her name, Kath, but her nickname, Kath the Dainty Dragon. Great nickname.
Love it.
Wouldn't want to go up in a courtroom against a dainty dragon. Any
No.
type of dragon, but definitely not a dainty one. When we started this podcast, one of the things that you said you did not want to do was stories about children being harmed. And now we've done, what, 3 this year, I think?
Feels like I need to start being involved in picking the podcast.
So there was band teacher, there was teacher's pet. I mean, there were certainly children at the center of some of these other stories that we heard about. Certainly young people in some of these. And I don't know. I'm sorry for bringing this.
This was particularly, not that the others were easy to listen to, but this was particularly hard to listen to. I really just was trying to get through those first 3 episodes. The last 3, I really felt... I just thought it was done very well.
Is there anyone that you would say you should go listen to this? Like, is there any scenario in which you recommend this?
I think there's one person I think I would recommend this to who would probably be able to get through the first 3 knowing that the last 3 are more on the positive side. But there's very few. I mean, a lot of my friends have very young children.
Yeah. Okay.
So
that's fair.
What about you?
I think another way another question I maybe could have asked you is, how will you think about this one in the future? Like, is this one you're just going to block out and never think about again? Is this one you feel like is going to sort of haunt you? Is like, where does this sort of fall on the spectrum of things we've listened to?
I think that's a hard question to answer right now. I think it's too recent in my mind. I feel like there's part of me that wants to forget this ever entered my ears. However, there are elements to this that are going to impact my view on things, I think, forever.
You and I are both parents. And
Indeed.
I think as parents, I often, and me and my wife often, reflect on how, we're not perfect parents. No one's perfect parents. But at the same time, we think about like, well, things we do differently, looking back, whether it's looking back over today or it's looking back over, years ago, things that we could have done better, that we know more now. If we knew how this would play out, we would do things differently and better.
Yeah. I think the scary thing about something like this from a parenting perspective is how that's becoming so much harder. Like, even with the prevalence of AI, and I know they touched on it here, how AI can actually help in this, but that was 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Deep fakes can do very bad things with images that are nothing, that are not children being forced to do those acts, but the images and the videos that can be created could do that. And I don't know, I did that part in I think it was episode 6 where it mentioned one of the things that the survivors find really difficult to deal with is that their images are out there.
Yeah, for the older ones who are more kind of cognizant of that. I also
the younger ones will become cognizant of it. They just obviously didn't know at the time. And even I kept thinking, we heard like Ruby obviously is thriving and that's amazing, but the impact that this must have on your own life with your own partner, like your own like sexual identity when these kids grow up. It's really hard to imagine how anyone who goes through this can have a life that doesn't always have this living in it. And that's why I still go back to me not being able to even contemplate apologizing to Nadine and Pedro, or not apologize, but forgiving them.
Yeah.
They brought their 3-year-old fucking son to show him what they were doing. They brought him to the house. Like, you don't even give a shit about your own son.
So, sort of related to that, one of the last thing I wanted to mention was something that
went from very calm to very angry, but they're the feelings.
Yeah, that's justified. One thing this podcast didn't do that I a little bit wanted it to, although I didn't want it to be longer than it was. I thought the length was appropriate. Is, we heard at the beginning about how this, at the time of this crime, this was like 2013, was still a kind of new and rapidly growing form of sexual exploitation. And what it didn't do was sort of contextualize that against what came before. The exploitation of women and girls, and vulnerable people, has been going on as long as there have been people. It's just taken different forms. And I think something that struck me, and it struck me in that episode where they're talking about AI, and what you were just saying about AI too, is that I feel like part of it, maybe this is why Nadine and Pedro were able to kind of disassociate their morals from what they were doing. I can't speak for how they possibly lived with themselves, but to me, that's the alarming, one of the alarming takeaways from this is that part of why I feel like this proliferates is because people are further and further disconnected from seeing, like, they don't see those girls as people. They're objects. They're things on a screen. And what this podcast
there's things on the screen for the criminals who are consuming this.
Yes.
But Nadine and Pedro could see the girls. They could see the pain.
Yes. No. My point is more about the customers and the people viewing this, and how, that is part of a lineage. I mean, this touched on this a little bit, but like how this is an iteration of sex workers and the porn industry and all of that, which that's a different podcast. That's a different story. But like, this is a piece in that broader puzzle of why are we okay with people being trafficked and people being exploited and people being hurt in this way? Because we're okay with it to varying degrees in different contexts.
Yeah.
This is an extreme. Mm-hmm. But we tolerate it.
I mean, honestly, I think, yeah, it's the other. It's they don't exist. They're not little white children. There was one last thing I just wanted to note is there were a lot of people showing a lot of bravery here. I feel like one person who's really pivotal we haven't spoken about is the houseboy.
Yeah.
And I understand why someone would say, well, he knew he was caught and he blah, blah, blah. But we can't ignore it. It was pretty brave of him to get involved and do this. I'm sure he wasn't treated perfectly himself. And I'm sure there were threats in order to keep his mouth shut about what was happening. But without him, it would have been much harder. Yes. It would have taken longer. Meaning Ruby and the other girls would have been kept captive and continuously abused. And so I think it's, it's something that we have to note here that was pretty brave.
I agree. And I think, the other person that I'm glad they came back to and mentioned was the woman who's kind of the second in command after Nadine, and I think this is maybe what you were getting at with the houseboy, but like how this is similar to also what we talked about with Nexium, where even the people near the top can be victims themselves and under the control or being abused by the people at the top. I appreciate that they came back to her and acknowledged that she initially was going to go to prison, but then they realized that she really was more victim than criminal, as much as she did horrible things. But there's more of a story there. So.
Do you know, I found it extremely hard to find any reviews on this.
That baffles me since it won so many awards. Maybe it's more regional, but like there's people on Reddit in Australia.
I know.
Yeah, I think this is primarily an Australian. It's an Australian company that put it out, but I don't know. If you're out there on Reddit, review us, review this, share your thoughts. The world wants to know. What are you thinking?
Also, I loved the song. Like, obviously, I hate it because of the connection now, but it was really effective.
It's been stuck in my head all day. I went and I looked up the band You should look them up. So it's
Jenna Carley, Searching for Light. Homeland.
the song is
by
called
Searching
Homeland. The band is
The
called
band
Searching
is called
for Light.
Searching for Light. Yeah.
Go look them up on Spotify. They have several albums, and the artwork for their albums is all like drawings. It's colorful. I didn't listen to any of the music yet, but that one song is just, it's got a hook. If you have thoughts on this episode, leave us a comment. Let us know what you liked about this, what you'd like to hear from us in the future. If you're on Spotify, if you're on Apple, leave us a rating. We love those 5-star ratings. We have a lot of new subscribers lately on Spotify and Apple. And first of all, welcome. Thanks for listening. And if you haven't rated us yet, please do. And also tell a friend. We've apparently had a lot of people telling their friends lately. And so thank you for everyone who's done that. But you probably have more friends, so go out and tell those other friends you have. Tell them to go listen to our show, subscribe, rate, leave comments. It's all good.
All right, Jeff. Next time we're going back to California to hear of a wife, a mother, a blogger, and a Christian who is dying, apparently. We're going to preview Scamanda by Lionsgate Sound. That's on the next So Much Crime.
So Little Time. So Much Crime, So Little Time is a production of Mind Glove Media. The executive producer is Paxton Caloriso. Our associate producer is Blythe Ty. Our theme music was composed by Vyacheslav Starostin. If you haven't done it yet, please subscribe to this show on your podcast app. And don't forget to give us a 5-star rating and a review. Even better, tell your friends. To join the discussion, look for us on social media. Check out the show notes for all the links. Thanks for listening.